this case about whether you think the birth was real, whether you think there was a surrogate, whether you think Meghan was wearing a moon bump. The fact is, Harry and Meghan lied. Buckingham Palace lied on their behalf. There was a complete cover-up over the birth of Prince Archie.
Something didn't just slip, it exploded, and the shockwave hit straight at Meghan Markle with a force nobody saw coming. Because this wasn't just another passing headline or recycled controversy. This was the kind of moment that makes people stop mid-scroll, rewind, and ask, wait, did she really just say that? And just like that, the name Candace Owens ignited the fire even further, stepping in with a level of precision that didn't just question the narrative, it tore into it, piece by piece, exposing what many are now calling a timeline that doesn't just feel off, it feels impossible to ignore. Because here's the thing, this wasn't buried in some obscure interview or whispered behind closed doors. No, this happened in full view, under perfect lighting on a polished stage in Washington, D.C., where everything was supposed to be controlled, curated, and clean. Meghan stood there exactly as expected, poised, composed, delivering her message about empowerment with that signature calm confidence people have come to associate with her. It looked flawless, it sounded rehearsed, it felt safe, until it wasn't. Because out of nowhere, in the middle of that carefully structured speech, she dropped a line that didn't just pass by quietly, it lingered, it stuck, it triggered something. 5 years ago, Archie was so little and I had just gotten pregnant with Lily. And in that exact second, something shifted. Not visibly, not immediately, but mentally. Because people heard it, and then they processed it, and then they questioned it. And once that question entered the room, it didn't leave. Because timelines don't lie, or at least they're not supposed to. Archie, born in 2019. Llibet in 2021. That's not speculation, that's documented, public, fixed. So when 5 years ago suddenly enters the equation, pointing toward 2020, everything starts to feel misaligned. And the internet, it didn't hesitate. Within minutes, that clip was everywhere, slowed down, zoomed in, replayed like evidence in a courtroom. People weren't just watching anymore, they were investigating. And that's exactly when Candace stepped in. Not loud, not chaotic, just sharp, focused, controlled. She took that clip and held it up like a spotlight, asking the question everyone was already thinking, but hadn't fully formed yet. How does something this basic not line up? And then she went further, much further. Saying Meghan doesn't just misspeak, she reshapes her story. That this isn't about a slip, it's about a pattern. And suddenly, what could have been dismissed as a minor mistake turned into something much bigger, because people started remembering small inconsistencies, slight variations, moments that once felt insignificant now being revisited with a completely different lens. And this time, they weren't letting it go. Because when a timeline shifts even slightly, it doesn't just affect one moment, it casts doubt on everything connected to it. And then came more voices, familiar ones, critical ones, like Lady Colin Campbell stepping in with that cutting remark that Meghan doesn't even bother to keep the timeline straight, that it's all just a muddle. And that word, muddle, it stuck because it didn't sound like an accident. It sounded like chaos disguised as control. But here's where things took an even sharper turn, because right after the event, a polished highlight reel appeared online. Smooth, flawless, almost too perfect. The kind of edit where every smile lands, every pause feels intentional, every reaction is exactly what you'd expect from a well-produced moment. But then, the people who were actually there started speaking, and their version didn't match. They talked about awkward pauses, uneasy laughter, moments where the energy dipped, reactions that didn't quite land, even interruptions, things that never made it into that pristine final cut. And suddenly, the narrative split in two, what was shown and what was experienced. And that's when the whispers turned into accusations. That reality itself was being edited, that what people were seeing wasn't the full picture, it was a version, a controlled version, a filtered version. And Candace didn't miss that either. She leaned straight into it, saying Meghan proves authenticity by removing everything real. And that line, it hit like a trigger, because it didn't just criticize, it reframed everything. Now people weren't just questioning what was said, they were questioning what wasn't shown. And then came the deeper layer, the one that made everything feel even more unsettling. The idea that this wasn't accidental at all, that this level of control, this precision, this ability to shape moments might come from somewhere else entirely, from training, from experience, from performance. Because Meghan isn't just a public figure, she's an actress. and actors know how to deliver emotion. They know timing, expression, impact. But when that same skill set appears outside a script, outside a controlled environment, it raises a different kind of question. Is this real or is this performed? And suddenly, the word started circulating. Performative, not loud, not official, but present, lingering in conversations, growing quietly. And then Candace pushed it even further, drawing a comparison that made the entire conversation even more explosive, suggesting that this isn't just influence or inspiration, but something closer to imitation, referencing Princess Diana saying, Meghan built an image that mirrors a story people already recognize, a familiar narrative, a second act. And when she said that Prince Harry fell for the script, everything intensified, because now this wasn't just about a timeline, it was about identity. And the pattern critics keep pointing to, it's starting to feel repetitive to them. The same setup, the same dynamic. Meghan in a moment of pressure, Harry stepping in again and again and again. And while all of this was unfolding, another detail quietly slipped into the spotlight. One that didn't scream for attention, but somehow said everything. The Williams sisters, Serena Williams and Venus Williams, launching something new, a podcast, a major move. And yet, no Meghan, no mention, no connection. And for people watching closely, that silence spoke volumes. Because in a world where associations are everything, absence becomes noticeable. And noticeable becomes suspicious. And suspicious becomes part of the story. And now the questions aren't slowing down, they're multiplying. Because what started as one sentence, one moment, one clip has turned into something much harder to contain. Something that's no longer just about what was said, but about what it reveals. And the biggest question hanging in the air right now isn't whether Meghan made a mistake, it's whether that mistake exposed something much bigger hiding underneath. And just when it felt like the storm couldn't get any louder, it did. Because what was supposed to be a message about independence suddenly flipped into something that critics couldn't stop tearing apart. And the contrast, it was impossible to ignore. Meghan stood there talking about empowerment, about financial freedom, about women building their own paths. But the audience? Not everyone was buying it. In fact, some weren't even listening anymore. They were comparing, measuring, questioning. Because when you say independence, people don't just hear the word, they look at the life behind it. And that's where things started to unravel again. Online reactions came flooding in, fast and unforgiving. Comments like independence built on inheritance and empowerment funded by royalty didn't just appear, they spread. And once those phrases took hold, they reshaped how people heard everything that followed. And of course, Candace Owens didn't hesitate to push straight into that contradiction. She framed it sharply, saying the message doesn't match the reality, that preaching independence while living in luxury tied to Prince Harry's wealth doesn't come across as empowerment, it comes across as performance. And just like that, the word independent started getting flipped, repeated, twisted, turned into something else entirely in the public conversation, dependent. And once a word like that sticks, it doesn't just fade away, because now every speech, every appearance, every statement started being filtered through that lens. People weren't just hearing what Meghan said, they were interpreting it against a growing pile of doubt. And that doubt, it didn't come out of nowhere. And critics argue it's been building for a while now, slowly, quietly, through small details that didn't quite align. Different interviews, different tones, different versions of the same emotional moments. One time describing a period as overwhelming and painful, another time presenting it as focused and healing. And now, with this timeline confusion thrown into the mix, those past moments are being pulled back into the spotlight, re-examined like pieces of a puzzle that suddenly don't fit the way they used to. Candace described it in a way that hit harder than expected, like living inside a script that keeps changing. And that idea, it stuck. Because it doesn't accuse directly, it suggests something more unsettling, that the narrative isn't stable, that it evolves depending on the moment. And if that's true, then what's real? And while all of this noise kept building online, something else stood out just as much. Silence from Buckingham Palace. Not a word, not a clarification, not even a subtle correction. And that silence, it didn't calm anything down, it did the opposite. It amplified everything. Because when something this widely discussed gets no response at all, people don't assume it's nothing, they assume it's something too complicated to touch. And insiders, those vague, unnamed voices that always seem to hover around moments like this, started feeding that idea, saying the palace knows, saying they're aware, but choosing not to step in, because stepping in might open a door they'd rather keep closed, a door that leads into deeper scrutiny, bigger questions, not just about Meghan, but about the institution itself. And that's where this situation starts to shift. Because now it's not just about one speech or one timeline, it's about credibility on a much larger scale. Because if the public starts questioning details tied to royal narratives, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads, it expands, it touches everything connected to it. And Candace, she made it clear this isn't going away. Not quietly, not quickly. Because if there ever comes a moment where the palace is forced to confirm or deny something, that's not just a response. That's a turning point. And people are watching closely for it. Because right now, everything feels suspended, hanging, waiting. And in that waiting, the speculation grows louder. Critics aren't just pointing at inconsistencies anymore, they're building arguments around them. Saying this isn't about dislike, it's about patterns, about repetition, about details that don't hold steady over time. And when details don't stay consistent, trust starts to slip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly, until one day people realize they're no longer sure what to believe. And that's exactly where things took their most extreme turn. Because once doubt reaches a certain level, it doesn't just stay reasonable, it spirals. Theories start appearing, some subtle, some wild, some crossing lines that even critics hesitate to repeat. Claims about rewritten histories, about entire narratives being constructed, about things that go far beyond a simple timeline confusion, looping, replaying, refusing to disappear. Because in the end, this entire storm didn't start with leaked documents or hidden sources. It started with Meghan's own words. Words that people can hear for themselves. Words that don't change no matter how many times they're replayed. And that's what makes this moment different. Because it's not built on speculation alone. It's built on something people believe they witnessed. And now the question isn't just what happened, it's what happens next. Because rebuilding trust, if that's even the goal, doesn't come from more speeches or more polished appearances. It comes from consistency, from clarity, from saying one version of events and standing by it without reshaping it later. And Candace captured that idea in one line that spread faster than anything else: just say what's true once and let it stand. Simple, but not easy, because if the story keeps shifting, the risk isn't just more headlines or more criticism, it's something far more permanent. The risk of being seen not as controversial, but as unbelievable. And that's a label that doesn't fade, it sticks. And now everything hangs on that edge, between explanation and silence, between trust and doubt, between what's been said and what people are still trying to figure out. Because this story isn't finished, not even close. And the next move, it could change everything.